Dividing whole numbers notes. When dividing whole numbers, your answer is called the quotient. Quotient. So I'm going to use the example of 94 divided by 2 for this next two problems. The first number in the division problem is called the dividend, and that goes inside or under the division symbol. And the division symbol I'm talking about is that right there. And so 94 is going to go inside. And I'll probably actually say inside the house or garage or something like that, just to remind you that that's going underneath or inside of that division symbol. The second number in a division problem, though, is called the divisor and goes outside the division symbol. So my 2 would go out here. So that's how I would set up my problem. Now, eventually when I'm completing these division problems, some of them might not come out evenly. So the amount left over is called the remainder. All right, and I'm going to show you an example of what are we going to do with the remainder if I have one. So I have 95 divided by 4. So I'm going to put 95 inside my house and divide that by 4. So 4 goes into 9 2 times. So I get 8, and I subtract 15. After I bring down that 5, 4 goes into 15 3 times, which is 12. So I have 3 left over. Well, what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to use that 3 to write a fraction with my divisor, so 3/4. And now when you're typing your answers onto your Google Doc or in a Google form, so especially for your assignment today, you're going to use a backslash to symbolize division. So if I was to type that 3/4 into my Google Doc, I can actually type 3 backslash, which is also the question mark key, fourths. And then it will actually make it look like a normal fraction for most every fraction you type in. So now, if we move on to the next part, what types of words are we going to associate with division problems? Well, we're going to use quotient. We'll have parts, separated, cut up, half, equal share, and then per. Those are great words to be looking for when you are doing a dividing of whole numbers word problem. But let's get into some examples now. So the very first one I have is 392 divided by 8. So now, my initial thinking right away is 8 goes into 3. How many times? Well, it doesn't. You could put a 0, but I like to put an X to hold that value or that place value there so I know nothing can go in that spot. So now I'm looking at 8 goes into 39, which is 4 times. So 8 times 4 is 32. I subtract to get 7. Bring down the 2. 8 goes into that 72 9 times. So 9 times 8 is 72. I subtract and I see that it comes out evenly. Moving on to the second problem, 9,285 divided by 5. Now you might ask, is there a way to see if these are going to come out evenly? Well, I could have looked at the first one and thought, you know what, 8 is an even number, 2 is an even number, so there's a chance. This one, if I'm dividing by 5 and 5 is my last number, I know it will come out evenly. So 5 goes into 9 one time. Bring down my 2. 5 goes into 42 8 times. And notice I'm putting that 8 right over the number that I brought down. So 5 times 8 is 40. Subtracting, I get a 2. Bring down 8. 5 goes into 28 5 times. 5 times 5 is 25. Bring down my 5. And then 5 goes into 35 7 times. 0, 0. So my first two come out evenly. Let's take a look at some problems that might not come out evenly. And we'll work on writing that remainder as a fraction. So next one, I have 671 divided by 3. Well, 3 goes into 6 2 times, which gives me 6, and I subtract to get 0. Bring down that 7. 3 goes into 7 2 times to give me 6. 1 left over. Bring down that 1. So now 3 goes into 11 3 times. And 3 times 3 is 9. Subtract to get 2. So writing my fraction, 2 is the numerator or the top number of the fraction, and 3 would be my denominator. So 2 you could say is your remainder over your divisor. Lastly, I have 410 divided by 12. So 12 I know cannot go into 4, so I'm going to put my x there. 12 goes into 41 3 times, and 12 times 3 is 36. Now, you might not know that. You might not know your 12's multiplication very well. Well, you might have to do some guess and check. You may have to, on the side, write down 12 times 2, 4, that's 24. Well, that's not really close. I can probably get another one in there and keep trying and guessing until you get close. That might be what you have to do for your really large divisor numbers. Maybe some of you, it will click right away and you'll be like, you know what? I know that this is going to get me close. So now getting back to the problem, when I do my subtraction, I'm going to need to borrow. So 11 subtract 6 is 5. Bring down my 0. 12 goes into 50 4 times, which 12 times 4 is 48. And subtract. I can think of this as 50 subtract 48, which is 2, or you can do the borrowing if that's what is most comfortable for you. So 2 12ths is going to end up being my remainder, and for now, that's the way we're going to write it. Some of you may recognize that you could reduce that, but for right now, let's just leave it as 2 12ths, and we can worry about the reducing part of it later. So these are your notes and examples for dividing whole numbers. Make sure you Reference back to this if you have questions. Otherwise, you could also email me.